Hello, our users. Happy Thanksgiving. My name is John Kulas. I'm a 20-year professor of industrial and organizational psychology, 11-year user of R for normal, boring, analytical, and statistical pish-posh reasons. But for the last 8 or 9 years, the majority of that 11 years that I've been using R, I've also been crafting entire projects from within the same program that I specify my R code within. And so this is known as, sometimes referred to as literate programming, wrapping your code and your narrative within the same environment. I've been calling it single platform project execution because psychologists aren't really familiar with that literate programming phrase. And we're trying to kind of slowly introduce the concept into those arenas. But I'm here every Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern for roughly an hour. And I'm here just promoting this way of structuring your work. So if you're doing anything quantitative, if you're working with, it can be qualitative as well, but if you're doing analytical projects and ultimately want to include those in a report or a slide or a paper, then why not do it all in the same environment? And so we're here just to promote that way of structuring your work if you are doing analytical things. I say we, oftentimes I'm joined by collaborators and colleagues on these projects, and that's always fun. I didn't invite them today since we're so close to Thanksgiving. I don't want to encroach upon people's holiday time, so I didn't invite them. So spoiler, tonight will probably just be me, unless somebody pops by and says, "Hey, I wanna pop in." So we use this metaphor of an academic office hour, and that's how we all met. It was in an academic university environment, and the doors literally open if someone's out there and they have a question about how to get started doing this, or how to if you're just stuck on something or you just want somebody to bounce ideas off of, we're here for that. And we want to be live with this. There are a lot of canned static resources available on YouTube and elsewhere, but we wanted to, in addition to that, just kind of make ourselves available again using the metaphor of a office hour. So knock on the door and come on in, ask a question. I'll try to keep an eye on the comments. I'm not great at that, but I will try to. Actually, I just was thinking of something right before I popped in here, and I think there's an option to auto-populate comments, and that can be a task for me between this week and next week. I'll try to figure out how to get StreamYard to do that. That'd be a better way of me kind of staying on top of these things. In the absence of any sort of questions that are asked, what we've been doing is we've been taking a look at just a limited feature of these platforms that we use to help facilitate the wrapping of your narrative and your code within the same space. And so tonight, well, before we get to tonight, I should say the reason we're doing Markdown tonight is because a few weeks ago we decided to take this journey along the alphabet in terms of the topics that we cover. So we started at ABC and we're now at M. So because the topic had to start with M, we're following this very strict rule. We have to start our topics sequentially with a certain letter of the alphabet. Tonight I thought it would be fun to talk about Markdown. And Markdown is it's related to the narrative part of narrative or narration and code. So Markdown is one way that we can format the narrative in ways that look appealing. So also next week. So next week I'm very excited because next week I have a great idea for N. And those of you that were around last year might recall we did holiday cards. I'm Christian, so I did a Christmas card. But the holiday cards can just be for the season. And I did it kind of late, so I didn't even get to send mine out. I mean, we did it on this weekly live stream. And next week, guess what? So Noel, I believe, is French for Christmas season. Navidad is certainly Spanish for. So we have some N possibilities here. So next week, I'm super excited. I think next week, what we'll do, because we're going to be on N, is we'll get a little sneaky and we'll make those holiday cards. But those holiday cards, I think I have a workaround to make those holiday cards seem like they fit within our progression across the alphabet here. And I was thinking about that today and kind of excited about that. I'm looking forward to revisiting that. The other thing, so the slides are available as always in the comments. There's a link to them. And then I also mentioned if you have questions about how to get started, sometimes what I'm hoping to do on these weekly sessions is be a bit of a bridge for some of the early intro type information that people need to get started with this, and the high level kind of using this every day person. I'm hoping to be a bridge between those two spots. So you who are interested in this and maybe aren't fully skilled at it, and I'm certainly building my skill and knowledge with this, but I'm hoping to provide a resource so we can help you level up your skills in terms of these work procedures as well. So that being said, last week we did find this wonderful resource, and again, there's a link to the slides in the comments here this week. But within the slides themselves, there are also hyperlinks, and one of the hyperlinks takes you to this book that kind of explains some of the background on how to get started and some of the things you can do using the software platform that we've primarily been relying on, which is called Quarto, and that's this symbol that you see here, this kind of 4-quadrant blue. It kind of looks like it's hunting season here, so it kind of looks like a crosshairs. Sorry if there's any deer fans out there. But the Quarto software platform is the one that we've been playing with a lot. It's the one that I lean on to make these slides. But there's a great resource that does a lot of the same things that we're trying to do on this weekly session in terms of giving people access or helping people kind of gain better access to using this system of structuring your work. Okay. So let's get into our transition into what happened last week. So because these are intended to be exploratory, these weekly sessions, they're open-ended, and I kind of have an idea of what we might do, but never quite know what direction we're going to go. So at the beginning of each week, for about 20 minutes, maybe sometimes 30, if it's a topic that merits it, we'll spend some time recapping what happened the previous week, and that is supposed to be structured in a way that's a little more conducive and helpful for you to learn, me as well. So me putting them together, I kind of reinforces some of the principles and things that we learned when we were covering that exploratory topic. Okay, so let's get into our transition here for what happened last week.
Last time, you remember, that foul fiend, Boris Badenov, had unleashed another mechanical mouse attack on an American town.
And what is our honor city, Natasha?
Podunk Junction, darling.
Okay, you rats, seek 'em.
But as the metal-munching moon mice started off on their grisly journey, they were spotted by Rocky and Bullwinkle and the two moon men, Gidney and Cloyd.
We didn't know our moon mice would be used this way, Rocky.
No, cross my hearts.
Hearts? You got more than one?
On the moon, we always carry a spare heart.
Must be nice come Valentine's Day.
Never mind that. We gotta head 'em off.
Of course, there was only one place to head them off.
At the pass!
And so, a short time later, our heroes stood in the middle of the narrow pass awaiting the onrushing horde of metal monsters.
Listen to that, Bullwinkle.
Oh, the patter of tiny feet.
They'll be on us in a minute. Remember, they shall not pass.
Rocky doing his best Gandalf impression there. So, a very appropriate place to end that. Actually, well, I'm not going to go there. Okay, so last week I mentioned that we've been following the sequence of the alphabet. So last week we were on the letter L, and we looked at layouts. Now, there's different ways of thinking about the layout of content within these documents that we've been creating using these literate programming principles. And what we focused on last week was we were just trying to isolate information within a document and force that isolated information into columns. Let me just do a really quick kind of let me do a really quick demonstration here of what we were trying to do. Let's open up a new Quarto document, and again, I'm going to go fast with this. because I just wanted to demonstrate what we were trying to do. So this is the, sorry, I'll slow down. This is the Quarto template that comes pre-populated with just some boilerplate information in there. And what we wanted to do is to not make the entire document in a number of columns, but we wanted to have isolated information in columns. So here, the expectation is this first information is going to span the entire width of the page, and then I'm going to have some very basic information with a header on it, and then some content below it in a left-hand column and a right-hand column, and then I'm going to go back to the full span. So what's happening here is I have a specification using what are called fences, and these are fenced divs in the context of an HTML product. But then I have some kind of attributes given to those divisions or those elements, those containers, and I'm saying I want the width of these containers to be split half and half. So let's do a quick rendering of that. I'm going to put it someplace. Oh, funky. I got so much stuff. Casey's the one that we tend to overwrite a lot. Happy Thanksgiving, Casey, if you're out there. I haven't seen you for a while. But sorry, we've been kind of overwriting your standard file here. So this is the information I'm talking about. So within the layouts, what we were trying to do is we were trying to, within the broader document, we were going to see if we can isolate content and specify the layout of that content, specifically with regard to columns. And so columns were what we focused on last week, and columns are what we're going to focus on then again tonight. So let me re-render my slides here. So as we were exploring how to specify columns that are targeted, that are at targeted locations within the documents that we're trying to produce, what we did was we focused on 3 different document types. And so we said, well, we can have an HTML type document, and that's either an HTML page, or what you're looking at here is rendered as an HTML document or file as well. And so we tried the HTML files, and those are very flexible, and those are very receptive to all different sorts of methods to do things. And then typist and PDF document types, those tend to be a little more rigid in terms of the way in which we specify things, the way in which we script in an attempt to receive something in a preconceived kind of format. So what we did was we actually tried a few different approaches toward controlling columns, but we also made sure to look and see how those different methods that we used kind of worked within these 3 different document types. And so it's also important, before we get into it too deeply, to acknowledge the version of the software, Quarto, that I'm running on this machine, because the effectiveness of each of these methods is potentially going to shift across different methods, across different versions of the software, of the Quarto software. And so it's my belief, I think this is happening, that Posit, the company that publishes Quarto, I think they're kind of moving toward a goal of toward a goal of the product that you're interested in being inconsequential. So currently it's not inconsequential. So currently the way that I script things, I'm going to want to have some forethought in terms of whether I want to prioritize my scripting for an HTML output type, or a typist output type, or a PDF typist or output type. I think eventually that's going to be inconsequential, but currently it's not. So there's going to be there's going to be some turbulence between the spot we're currently at and where we eventually will get to, I'm sure, but we're just not quite there yet. And that has to do, we've talked about this before, but that has to do with 2 different distinct traditions in terms of wrapping your code and your analysis within the same platform. So there's a tech perspective, most people know that. Most people are familiar with LaTeX, but LaTeX is actually something that builds on a more basic system called Tech. And then the other tradition is Markdown, which we're going to spend some time on tonight. And Markdown is helpful for the production of HTML products, and Tech or LaTeX is helpful for the production of PDFs. And then Typist is something new. Typist is something that kind of takes HTML script, or what feels like HTML script or Markdown script, and it can produce a PDF. So it's kind of a bridge between the two to a certain extent. That's kind of neat. So we did see that the four different approaches that we took in terms of column specification, grid specification, layout specification, and layout and call specification, those all worked great with HTML products. There's two of them that did not work with Typist and PDF products. And so columns in particular, it's unfortunate that this did not work with Typist and PDF type documents, because it's the slickest, it's the easiest, it's the least cumbersome approach in terms of specifying your layout in terms of columns. And so what you see here, I have a bunch of tabs, and I'm going to try to walk through kind of some of the most important elements of these tabs. As we go through them, the content in terms of what's being asked to be displayed is consistent across these four different tabs. And so all I'm asking for is a heading that says first column and a heading that says second column. Those two hash marks that you see on lines 3 and 8, those are indicating headings, second level headings. And then the text that's being displayed below them is just going to be, I would like to have some text here in the first column, and an ellipsis or ellipses, and even more content here in the second column. And you see how that's rendered here on the right. This is a snip. It's not an actual document. It's just a snip from an HTML rendering using this specification. This specification that spans from line 1 to line 11. Now, on line 1, we have we're going to see this way of specifying your script is consistent across all four of these methods. So we have an opening fence, and then at the very end of what we're hoping to isolate and contain and focus on, we have what's called a closing fence. And Quarto likes these 3 colons, at least 3 colon specifications in terms of their fences. So everything that we're trying to do in terms of isolation happens here between lines 1 and 11, between the opening and closing fence. And then we can use attributes to specify what we want to happen within those fences, within those original fences. And so you can specify any column width that you want. You can have as many columns that you want. This is very flexible. It's awesome. I use it all the time. I use it for these slides all the time. I love the dot column method in order of specifying layout. Unfortunately, it only works with HTML products. And so that wasn't something that I was super happy to see. There's a second approach that we took, which uses a grid specification. Now the grid specification, I'm not going to go through them because we're already a little over time already in terms of the amount of time I wanted to spend on this relative to Markdown. But you can follow these hyperlinks in here and get a little more information about grid and why grid maybe isn't the approach that you want to have as your primary approach as you're trying to specify the layout of information within your HTML document. Now this is only going to work in HTML files again. But it seems to be better suited for not just isolated content within your primary document, but it seems to be better suited for the layout of the entire document. And so what do my gutters look like, which is the space between columns? What do my margins look like? What does my sidebar look like? What does my header look like? These are all elements that you can control with grid specifications. You can also control content within the document using grid specification. We did that, and we were able to replicate we were able to replicate this rendering using grid. But in retrospect, I think I'd probably keep that in my toolkit, uh, associated, cognitively associated with the entire document. So a way of specifying the format of the entire document, not just isolated specific elements within the document. Columns, if I'm in an HTML file, that works great for specific isolated content. So grid is there, and it's important to understand that we do have multiple options toward kind of achieving the same end. But again, I'm going to consider this moving forward to be a set of procedures that's probably better suited for the YAML, the front matter of these documents that we're creating. Layout and call, these are two different approaches that both worked across all product types. So they worked for HTML files, of course, because HTML doesn't seem to care how we do things. It's going to be nice to us regardless of what we're asking for. But importantly, they also worked for typist and PDF document types. And there is a bit of difference between what's happening with your document when you specify these two different ways of structuring things. First of all, if you're using this layout equals, and this is the syntactic structure of it right here. It's one possible syntactic structure of it. One of the things to note here is that you're specifying these values. So you can specify non-symmetric values for layout. So I could say 4060, I could say 3070, I can say 1010 and just kind of keep it isolated to one side of the document. There was, when I was looking up help files on the layout, as well as the layout and call options, I saw that there was some indication that these might be helpful if you only want a couple of columns, maybe 2 or 3, but they may not work if you have more than 2 or 3. That wasn't the case. So I took layout all the way up to 5 different columns and everything looked fine. It looked great. There are a couple caveats with the layout as well as layout and call options. When you're making your PDF document, now this is true for PDFs, but not for typist, which is a little, that was a little surprising. But the reason we have asterisks here on the PDF is because with the layout equals specification, you're going to get no gutter between the columns in your PDF document. Now that's a little technical, but what that means is you're not going to have a space here. So you're not going to have a space between the first column and the second column. Here, if you can see my mouse, you can see that there's a horizontal line, and that horizontal line is indicating the size of these containers, and there's space there. Now, with layout, there is not space. You can work around that, of course, like everything that we do. There's a workaround. The advocated workaround generally is including a negative value in here with your positive values. But there are several different workarounds that you can have. But just without any further specification, if we just ask for layout and ask for a PDF document, be prepared for the space between the columns to be non-existent. There won't be a space. And that just visually doesn't look like great. There's another thing that happened that I'm not quite sure if it's a bug or not, but when we include code chunks, so when we echo code, and that simply means I want a code block to be displayed in my document. What you're seeing here on the left-hand column, this is a code block. When we used layout, the columns that we specified, the code blocks did not want to be rendered within those columns themselves. So when the document was rendered, regardless of whether it was an HTML or a PDF or a typist, the code blocks were being placed not within the columns. And that's not something that we were controlling. That's just something that was happening. Just in terms of speculation, I didn't look deeply into this, but it might have something to do with the width of the specification of the code block and things like wrapping. So WRAPPING, so wrapping in terms of text and information is something that's actually a little, it's a little technical. So I'm wondering if maybe it has something to do with wrapping, but the code blocks did not operate as we expected them to with the layout or the layout and call commands. And then you can also, you don't just need to do columns, you can also do columns and rows. And the difference, or the way that you're telling Quarto what content to put in what column, has to do with vertical spaces. So this vertical space between line 4 and line 6, so the empty line 5 is meaningful. And that's a little different too. So if you're using, there is some consistency here with how some of the LaTeX specifications tended to operate. So it makes sense that this works with PDFs and typist documents. But vertical spacing typically does not matter when we're working with documents the way that we talk about working with them each week on this live stream. But with layout, the spacing does matter. The spacing between the first block of content and the second block of content, that's going to tell Quarto what you want to go in the first column and what you want to go in the second column. So this vertical spacing is now meaningful, and that's something that you have to be aware of if you're trying to generate columns using layout or using layout and call. And so layout and call here, it works the same as layout. So those vertical spaces are going to be equally important. So line 5 here is just as important as it was with the layout specification. Now, one difference here is that when you say layout and call equals, you can put a big number in there if you want, but layout and call is going to assign equal width to each of those columns. That might be a kind of a macro or a quick way to specify layout if you're okay with all of the columns having equal width. If you want to control the width, go ahead and use the broader layout command, because you can put in here, like I said, you can put 3070 in there. And it doesn't need to add to 100 if you don't want to do that either. And then the other thing here we can do, in addition to end call, you can do end row. That's not something we were interested in, but when you get to layout and layout end call, these are used fairly frequently with image placement. And so, the image placement, let me do a quick hyperlink here. You can see some of the different ways that you might want to actually organize images. And there's one that has 2 on top and 1 spanning broadly on the bottom. I kind of wanted to get to that. Let me see if I thought I had a hyperlink to that. It's probably here. Here we go. So with the layout specification, and I didn't share this because, again, the syntax just starts to get a little unwieldy and wonky and scary looking if you have nested brackets or nested fences. And so here we have brackets within brackets, but you can actually specify what you want to happen on the first row, what you want to happen on the second row. And the way this is structured, you can probably go to more than just 2 rows, but you can see the result here. And that's obviously something that is kind of neat for images. Now with text, you probably don't need to do this because this bottom one is having the same effect as no columns whatsoever. But you're also seeing here this space between the images as being important, and that's what's identifying what should go first, what should go second, and what should go third. Okay, so that was layouts. Layouts are pretty fun. It's good to have, like I said, it's good to have multiple ways in which you're attempting to actually go ahead and do something. And the opening and closing fences across all these procedures was the same. It's just that with 2 of these, with grid and columns, there were intermediate fences that are specified as well, that are giving attributes to the containers. And with layout and layout end call, we're kind of using this empty space to fulfill the same function. So instead of being explicit as we are here, we were just relying on this space as an indication of where the break should occur. And again, that's not something I love, but as long as you're aware of it, you can probably live with it, I suppose. Okay. So today, 2 days before Thanksgiving, so before you got your tryptophan in you and you're laying on a couch and can't move, we're going to do a little movement. We'll do some calisthenics. We're going to do some markdown playing. And I'm going to show you kind of how I'm using some of these data science tools to help me in terms of the way I store, I guess, artificial intelligence suggestions. And that sounds really weird, but I'll show you that here today. So Markdown, I do have a couple of links in here. I mentioned that there's kind of two traditions toward scripting things or structuring work in these kind of literate programming ways, depending on whether you're coming from or whether you're trying to produce an HTML type product or a PDF type product. The PDF type product started, the specification of that started in 1978. The guy that is associated with it, his name's Donald Knuth, Knuth. And Knuth developed a typesetting system, and it's called Tech. And he has a cool book called the Tech Book. And he has a wonderful sense of humor. It's wonderful to read. I've listed it on these sessions before as a hyperlink. If anyone is interested in it, drop me a note. I can help you out. But in the early 2000s, John Gruber also developed something with a very similar kind of orientation. And that similar orientation was trying to come up with a shorthand language that facilitates the specification of HTML. HTML is really unwieldy. It's really wonky. If you just inspect a web page, you see HTML. It has all these tags. It has all these. It has all this formatting specification on it. It's difficult to read. Now, so what Gruber did was he said, well, I kind of like email. Is there a way of specifying? Is there a shorthand way that we can specify the way things should be formatted and laid out and presented that doesn't have all that goop on it? It became known as Markdown. And so Gruber invented Markdown. Markdown currently has all kinds of what are called flavors. These are just different dialects. So R Studio has its own flavor of Markdown called RMarkdown. Quarto is a little bit different, even further than that, and that's called Quarto Markdown. So you'll see the file extensions for old RMarkdown files. It's RMD, RMarkdown. The file extensions for Quarto Markdown files are QMD, Quarto Markdown. There's GitHub flavored Markdown. There's the original Markdown. Oftentimes the file extensions on these types of files just have MD on them. Now, a very popular, increasingly so, kind of way to interact with these Markdown files is through a program called Obsidian. Now, I haven't used Obsidian, but my understanding is it's primarily used for note taking. And Obsidian also uses Markdown. And so there's all kinds of different places we can go to take a look at Markdown, see what it is, see what it does. There are several what I call playgrounds, and so I made a hyperlink here in this week's slides to one that I think is helpful and useful. So on the left, it shows you what information looks like in Markdown itself. And Markdown includes things like these hashtag symbols. These indicate headers. It's things like asterisks. Asterisks either mean italic or bold. Underscores. Now we're starting to see here with the underscores, we're starting to see a potential difference here between some of these different flavors. So pure Markdown, the Gruber Markdown, the way that you specify italic is with underscore. That's not necessarily going to be shared across different flavors or dialects of Markdown. Double asterisks are bold instead of italic, and you can see how things are rendered here on the right. Now, one of the reasons I like this editor in particular is you can literally change on the left, and it in real time gives you a preview of what things actually look like. If you wanted to unbold that, you could do that. there's combinations of bolding and italicizing. The headings, if you want to see what, I guess it does have headings all the way up to heading 6. We could continue this and say this is H3 heading. And you can see they get a little smaller. The neat thing about Markdown is that the rendering on the right that you see is just one possibility in terms of what this information looks like. You can put filters on this. And so you can make it render however you want to make it render. And so, for example, if we were interested in these headings conforming to something like a style guide, so the American Psychological Association publication manual or style guide, if we wanted these headings to conform to that, we could actually have it do that. And our scripting would be the same. We would keep this exactly the same. We would just change the filter through which what we're seeing on the left is produced. And so Markdown is fantastic. I love it. It's a way of communicating what you want things to look like in terms of formatting, but not having to apply that format in your writing. So we're doing shorthand for formatting in the writing itself. Image specifications, this structure seems to be shared across different Markdown flavors. So it's exclamation point, square brackets, and then parentheses. Now the alt text here, that does differ across platforms. So the Quarto Markdown, for example, doesn't use the information in the square brackets as alt text. It actually uses it as a figure caption. If I right click on this, I should be able to see the alt text. Yeah, it says this is a sample image. Well, it's also the title. Okay, interesting. But we should be able to put in whatever image we want. Well, let's just take one of these guys, I guess. I'm going to right click on this green. What the heck is going on? Greta Thunberg. Why does Greta Thunberg have some, it looks like a Chicago, like on St. Patrick's Day in Chicago, they always dye the river green, like that color. I have no idea what that has to do with Greta Thunberg, but I don't know. Maybe Sweden does something similar. Links are pretty universally indicated by this structure here. What you want the hyperlinked information to be in square brackets and where you're linking to in parentheses. Now in Quarto, when we're doing papers and presentations and things like that, this linking also works internally. So I can have a link internal to my document. And that generally is also this square bracket parenthesis structure. It's just a little bit different from what you see here on lines 43 and 45. The only difference is the presence or absence of that exclamation point. It obviously has a much consequentially different effect in terms of the rendering of it. Block quotes. I use block quotes quite a bit. I love them. So block quotes they just make the rendering look a little different, stand out a little bit. It gives this, almost universally gives this vertical line. You can embed block quotes within block quotes. I don't think I've ever done this, so I'm not sure if that structure is shared or not. Tables. This is a Markdown table. This is how tables traditionally have been structured within Markdown. For us, for data scientists, for people who are using Quarto or RMarkdown to make presentations and reports and papers, you probably don't want to do this. So this is okay for smaller. This is okay for smaller matrices and smaller bits of information. But when it comes to things like data and summaries and representations of more complex objects, we have so many options right now using R or Python. If you're using Python, that's fine as well. we have so many options available that you probably aren't going to want to specify your table this way. You can use a package. And so we've used knitter as a package, and the function that comes out of that is cable, and then we've used cable extra also to apply a little extra formatting to those cables. We've used tiny tables. There's one called DT. There's so many options in terms of making tables that you probably don't need to specify it using Markdown, but you can if you want. And the spacing doesn't really matter. It's kind of nice just for humans to align these vertical spaces, but these pipes, but you don't really need to. Code blocks, we're using this in Quarto as well. When I in the slides, when I actually have bits of code that are presented that you can take and copy, those bits of code are indicated by tick marks, either 1 or 3 tick marks. And the inline code is 1 tick mark, and the blocks of code are generally indicated by 3 tick marks. And that, I mean, there's other tutorials out there in terms of what should I know for Markdown in order to make a document. You don't need a ton more than this. There is on this week's slides, I think it's on the second slide. I did put a link to the specifications that you're going to want to follow if you want to render information using Quarto. And so again, most of these are shared, but some of them are a little different, might be a little different. You see the tick marks here for inline code, what's called verbatim code. The headings are the same. The hyperlink specification is the same. The image specification is the same. Alt text, as I said, is a little different. So alt text is actually using this curly bracket specification. The lists are the same. The lists are actually a little permissible, or they permit different syntactic specifications. So generally speaking, an asterisk, a plus sign, or a dash are going to work equally well for non-numbered but bulleted lists. But so you can go ahead and look. I didn't even know this was a possibility here. This checkbox, that's awesome. That's really neat. That's really cool. Okay, so anyway, there's all kinds of specific specifications in terms of how to render things. Again, the tables, don't worry about tables. You're probably not going to ever use those. You don't really want to use those, I don't think, because we have so many awesome package resources that we can use from within our IDEs. Now, I want to spend a little time here on the IDEs because there are different ways to specify and use Markdown. I've actually been using the 3 IDEs, well, I've been using one primarily, but you can use all 3 of the IDEs that we've been talking about on these weekly sessions to view Markdown information. And now, normally, the way that my expectation for the way most of you want to know Markdown is you're going to write it. So for me, for years and years and years, for the majority of those 8 or 9 years that I've been using this process, I've only been writing Markdown. I haven't really had to interpret Markdown. Well, along comes AI. So let's take a look at something here. So I'm going to bring you to my GitHub page because I do like, for code completions, I really like GitHub Copilot. If Alicia's watching, thank you, Alicia. She recommended using it, and it's really been great. I love it. So here's a back and forth that I had with GitHub Copilot in terms of trying to save a mermaid graph as a particular file type from within Jupyter Lab. Don't ask me why I was doing that, but I was doing that, and so I was having difficulty doing that. The formatting of what GitHub Copilot and other AIs, by the way, so this is going somewhere. So the formatting of GitHub Copilot is very nice. There is, now that you've seen a little Markdown and what it looks like, you can see this inline specification here for Mermaid CLI. You can see a hyperlink. You can see bulleted lists. You can see numbered lists. You see code blocks. So all of this stuff, if you just tried to copy this and paste it into Word or a different processor, you would lose all the formatting. Now, there are Markdown editors you can use. This probably works in Obsidian as well, but it works fine within JupyterLab. It works fine within RStudio. It works fine within Positron. And so let's do this. So if I wanted to maintain the very nice kind of formatting of this information here, I can copy what GitHub Copilot is telling me in terms of its recommendation. So I copied it, and I'm going to spin up JupyterLab. So if you remember JupyterLab, it's the way that I recommended accessing it was through the command prompt, and then it spins up in a browser. And I am going to, let's open a new file. And again, we loaded 3 different engines on here, Julia, Python, and R. It doesn't matter. We're actually not gonna use the analytical engine. I'm just gonna use the Markdown. So I'm gonna paste in here what GitHub Copilot was giving me for a recommendation. And now when I paste it, you can see that it doesn't look as nice, but it doesn't look as nice because it's written in Markdown. So if I actually execute that cell, I now get the same exact information, that almost exactly. So I'm getting a PowerShell instead of the nice code blocks, but it's still accessible. I'm getting very nicely represented information that well represents not only the content, but also the format of what I got from that AI recommendation. Now, it's not just GitHub Copilot, so I use Grok as well. Grok is not great for code, but we can ask Grok. Let's do it since we did Python. How do I generate a nice graph with using the Palmer Penguins data set from within JupyterLab using a Python kernel? And so I'm not so interested necessarily in the steps themselves, but we want to represent the steps. So you're seeing Grok, this different AI, is also giving me this nicely formatted in these code chunks, and these are copyable individually code chunks. But if you want to navigate, they put an emoji in Grok. Okay, we'll see how this works. So I don't remember emojis, but we'll see if emojis work. So I'm going to copy, and so Grok actually gives you the option. It says, do you just want the text, which is, again, going to lose all the formatting, or do you want the Markdown? Well, no, I want the Markdown. Let's go back into JupyterLab, and I'm going to just delete the previous and paste in Grok's recommendations. Again, it looks a little intimidating, actually. There's the emoji. Funny. And if I render that, I don't want it as code. I want it as Markdown. If I render that, if I render that, we actually see the formatting nicer. Again, it's indicating the code blocks a little different. So the code blocks, it was saying PowerShell previously. This time it's actually giving me this Python indicator. There's a little slight difference here in terms of the formatting, but it certainly is a lot nicer than just copying and pasting text. You can also do this. You can do this within your other data science IDEs. Now, this isn't what the creators of the IDEs intended when they created these for us. They didn't intend for us to use them as Markdown interpreters, but you can. If you in RStudio itself, there's all kinds of different file types that you can use. If I go to File, New File, and look at the listing, there's all kinds of different file types, and there's more than this, but there's a bunch of common file types that you can choose from. The one that I'm interested in right now is located about halfway down this menu, and it's called Markdown file. And if I paste in the content that I took from Grok here, and then ask for, there's different things I can do. I can try, we could actually render this as a Quarto document, or we could just look at a preview of it. And this preview now looks a lot more similar to what I'm getting in Grok, but again, you're seeing slightly different interpretations in terms of the renderings of the documents themselves. But I've been doing this. So when I go to AI and I ask for something and I want to save it, now GitHub Copilot's great because it keeps a listing for you. You don't really need to keep your own personal library of answers to things. But Grok doesn't. So if I want to retain something that Grok gives me as a recommendation, I can actually quite easily just go to one of these IDEs that I'm using all the time anyway, and I can just get a really good representation of that information. Now, there is something a little different here that I'm seeing. My list isn't coming through great. So initially I had a listing. I think I've lost it now. Where'd you go, Grok? I think I lost. Originally I had a bulleted list, and that bulleted list doesn't look like it came through well. Let's try the GitHub code again, because that's a little less wordy, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the Grok Markdown with the GitHub Markdown. I'm going to try a different preview. We'll see what that looks like. Yeah, it looks great. My bullets are coming in fine. My hyperlink is coming in great. The hyperlink actually works. It's just fantastic. I really love using these data science editors as Markdown interpreters. And so anyway, you can also do this in Positron. I don't know how interested people are in this as kind of a way of navigating Markdown and how you use and specify Markdown. Let's do it quick, I guess. We've got a little bit of time. So Positron is not something that I use all that frequently. Actually, hardly ever. I don't have a great way to navigate it yet. I think one of these weeks we'll probably spend a little time. One of these weeks we'll probably spend a little time on Positron. I guess it might be week starting in P, maybe, right? We're getting close now. M-N-O-P. Wow. Okay, we're getting close. I don't know if I'm ready for that quite yet, but maybe we'll do it. Drop me a note if you want me to. We can cover Positron. But absent that, I might choose something else. I don't know, Palmer penguins or something. I don't know. But I can go ahead and paste that Markdown again. And there's different ways. There's different ways of actually viewing this within Positron. One of the ways is they have kind of a shortcut preview option there, and you're seeing it looks very similar to both. Well, I shouldn't say that. It looks very similar to how RStudio rendered my Markdown. Wow, look at this. I am getting something really different here. So there's a dynamic on this editor. We did not see this in the other ones. This is interesting. So my cursor is being indicated interactively. So I don't know if you can see that well, but there's a vertical gray bar to the left of my cursor as I navigate these different sections of this rendered Markdown document, and that's pretty neat. Now across, one of the things that's nice about Quarto is within Quarto, these code blocks, they're going to have by default a copy button enabled. These Markdown files themselves aren't showing that. If we rendered these as a Quarto document, they would show. So let's just, one last thing before we quit tonight. Let's actually run the Markdown not as Markdown itself, but as a Quarto document, because the Quarto Markdown specification is going to be a little bit different. So some of these elements that we're seeing here, in terms of representation of the Markdown might look a little different as representations in terms of being interpreted as Quarto Markdown, QMD, rather than just MD. So I'm going to open up a new Quarto document. HTML is again kind of the most flexible option for us. You don't need that YAML. It understands that by default when you render one of these QMDs, it's going to produce an HTML file unless you override it and say I want something else. So I just overrode the YAML there, which isn't something I would normally do. But we're curious to see what this might look like rendered as a Quarto Markdown document. Okay, so upon render, it should ask me what I want to save it as. We'll override poor Casey again. I hope Casey has an awesome Thanksgiving since we overrode him twice already here. And this looks great too. So this looks a little better actually, and the reason I wanted to do it was to show this clipboard. So this clipboard is now active. Now, I'm not getting the vertical bar like we got in Positron, but I am getting this link to these different sections, which is interesting. So that's saying that each of these sections has a different tag on it. Usually you can see that in the code itself, but it looks like it's not here. So the way we do that normally in Quarto is we use that curly bracket, and I would just call this whatever you want to call it, how to, and then the link would then appear. But there's some internal logic here that's happening with, I don't know how they have this, but within their specification they're actually getting a tag already identified there, which is not expected, but pretty cool. It looks like what it's doing is it's just taking the entire title. You can see it's the hashtag up here. So it looks like it's doing that for each of these sections. So cool, so neat. Look at this inline code, how it renders. Man, I love using these data science IDEs as Markdown interpreters. It's great. Like I said, if you're dealing with AI, if AI gives you something in terms of recommendation, you want to keep it, go ahead and use it. Now, we did JupyterLab, we did we did Markdown within JupyterLab, we did Markdown within RStudio, we did Markdown within Positron, and just as a last thing here, we said let's paste that Markdown code in as a Quarto Markdown document and see what it gives us. This is fantastic. This is great. This is the one I would use, and this is the one I hadn't done this before. I've just been using Markdown. But the reason I would use it is because these code blocks are now, they maintain their operation. These are fully operative. So I can take this, copy it, paste it wherever I want. Oh, awesome. That is fantastic. It is so cool. Let's see if we, you can, by the way, I screwed this up somehow. It looks like it's now working again, but everything I put in, this is interesting. So that's a mermaid chart editor that I was using to try to save a mermaid chart as a SVG file type, and it wasn't working for me, which is why I went to AI, and AI told me within JupyterLab to go ahead and use this procedure that you're kind of getting a little sense of here. One last thing that we should try before I call it is let's see if we can render this as a different file type and see what that looks like. So I'm going to put the YAML back in. Format. Let's see what this looks like as a typist document. So this is, you know, nice as well. This might be a little easier to send to someone. So if you are interacting with AI and you get a recommendation and you want to share that recommendation with somebody, I might be tempted to do this. Now you're losing the interactivity because it's not supposed to be there with these code chunks, but your hyperlinks are still there. So your hyperlinks are still going to be active. The inline code specification, you can see it's not quite as prominent, but all the information is there, like including those hyperlinks. So that's good. All right, let's try a PDF and then we'll call her a night and then we'll say Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I think I have one different banner that I can put here. I don't know, is that more festive, less festive? I kind of like the turkey. Cartoon, well, he's a cartoon turkey, go figure. Right, those of you that have watched me for a while know I like my cartoons. So. And PDFs always take longer to render. They have this intermediary step where they're generating a tech file, same tech as Donald Knuth's tech. Ooh, that's pretty classy as well. I might like, so normally I kind of like the looks of those typist files a little better. I think I like, if we're using as a Markdown rendering system, I think I might like PDFs a little better. I was zeroing in there to see if the inline had a little extra visual cue on it in the PDF than it didn't in the typist document, but it doesn't. You can see that the visual indicator for the hyperlinks is a little more prominent by default here in these PDF files. The spacing between the paragraphs I kind of like a little better. The bold within these headings I kind of like a little better. They stand out a little more. The Arial type font within the code blocks I think I like a little better. Okay, so it is picking up on some. This is not good, actually. I don't know if typist did this or not, but it is picking up on some differentiation with the file extensions that we wouldn't. To me, that looks a little different colored, and that's not something I don't think that's something that we want, because that's an indication that there's something different about those elements, and there really isn't. It's just a continuation of the file itself. It's a extension on the file type. I do like the indicators on the hyperlinks a little better. These vertical or these horizontal lines are kind of funny. They didn't show up on HTML, did they? Let's do it quick. I keep saying we're done, and then I'm like, ooh, look at that. Ooh, look at that. We got to try that. That looks neat. This is why my classes when I was a professor always went way over, and why other professors were standing there saying, just get to the point, you idiot. Because I would get hung up on little things like this. Okay, so there are these horizontal lines. I didn't notice them before. They're spanning the entire body here at the bottom, and it's just these three lines. So that's funny. QMDs, the Quarto Markdown, those three lines are how you get a horizontal line, and I didn't see them in the script itself, but okay. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me on Markdown. It's fun to play with. Supposedly, if you don't want to, if you're not geeked out on like RMarkdown and Quarto and Jupyter Lab like I am, Obsidian seems to be kind of an area that you might develop some love and appreciation for Markdown as well. Okay, cool. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Next week, we're going to do Christmas cards, holiday cards. That's going to be a lot of fun. All in R-based holiday cards. Woo! And we'll get them out in time so you can send them to people. That's going to be a ton of fun. All right. Have a good Thanksgiving.